Presenting time is but an illusion in JavaScript. So you're probably wondering, ¿Quién eres tú? Well, my name is Jennifer Wong, and I work for a company called Mode Analytics. We do data analysis software, and I'm also a Mozilla Tech speaker. And I'm also known as a Whovian, which is a person who is really into Doctor Who. And since we're talking about time today, this talk is a little bit Doctor Who themed, so you can see all these photos of me with Doctor Who stuff. For those of you who don't know Doctor Who, I'll give you a quick introduction. So the first thing you need to know is that Doctor Who is a Time Lord, which is a human-like species with 2 hearts. They also can regenerate. So when they are about to die, they can regenerate and change their body form. So they can be male, female, non-binary. It's very unpredictable. They also have a tool called a sonic screwdriver, which can be used to analyze things and do other weird stuff like lock doors or unlock them. And they also have a thing called a TARDIS, which is a spaceship that they use to travel through time and space. So TARDIS is actually an acronym for time and relative dimension in space. And the last thing that you need to know is that their nemesis are Daleks, which are these things in the bottom right here. And they're basically these super violent aliens that live inside of this crazy-looking armor. And this is what Doctor Who looks like today, which is very silly. Okay, so you're also probably wondering, ¿Qué pasó? What happened to make me want to give this talk? Well, I was on a project at a previous company called Recurring Invites. We had a way of inviting people to different offices, and what we wanted to do was create a way for them to do it on a recurring basis. So multiple times a week, or a month, or a year, or during weekdays. So while working on this project, what I had to do was I had to generate a recurrence rule on the front end. I put a bunch of question marks because we know time is really not that great in the front end. And I had to do it in iCal format. So I started looking up existing recurrence rule libraries, and the only ones I could find were out of date by 1.5 or more years. So now there's an updated one, which you can use, but back then there wasn't, and so I wrote my own recurrence rule library. So some of the things that I also had to do was I had to ensure that the time zone was attached to the recurrence rule that I generated. So what that meant was that I needed the time zone of the office location rather than the employee's location, or his or her office, or localized time. So the reason why is that employees may be based all around the world, but they may book invitations for different offices. So this is what the form looked like. So here you can choose whether or not your invitation will recur on either a daily, weekly, monthly, annually, or weekday basis. And then you can choose an end date for that recurring invite. This is what a recurrence rule looks like. It's a string, and basically it's delimited by semicolons, and what you have is a frequency, and then you choose a day on which that recurs, and then an end date for that. Another issue that I ran into with recurring invites was that where I'm based in San Francisco is either in Pacific Standard Time or Pacific Daylight Time, which is GMT -7 or GMT -8. And I was noticing all of our tests would pass locally, so anyone who tested this on their computer was totally fine, but our continuous integration tests were breaking. And it started at 4 or 5 p.m. every day, which is about, I think, midnight GMT. And they would fail for several hours a day. So what happened was, it turns out that some of the tests were written assuming a specific time zone. So there was no time zone attached, and so we just assumed that our continuous integration servers were in the same time zone. But it turned out they were in a different time zone. And we actually couldn't set the time zone of those servers, unfortunately. Another thing was that tests were not written to expect that times, minutes, or hours apart might actually be in different days, depending on what time zone you're in. Whoopsies. So a quick solution that we had for recurring invites, so again, local testing versus CI testing, was to actually set a specific time zone on those tests. So unfortunately, this only reliably tests that specific time zone, and another thing was that we had to remember to reset the time zone at the end of the test, otherwise any of the following tests would fail as well. So some quotes by me: don't write your own recurrence rule library, doubly so for JavaScript. Also, check the time zone of your CI server, doubly so if it's running JavaScript tests. So, as we know, el tiempo es raro. Doctor Who says it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. So, we're going to talk a little bit about el tiempo, and I can see that el tiempo es muy importante to Medellín. So a bit of history about time. So if you go to Wikipedia's article about time, you'll find that there are artifacts from the Paleolithic era that suggest that the moon was first used to reckon time. Lunar calendars first appeared, and they actually measured between 12 and 13 lunar months, or 354 to 384 days. The earliest of lunar calendars was discovered in 8000 BC, and Egyptians were the first to create several of time measurement devices, such as the T-square, the sundial, and the water clock. Some types of time zones and standards that exist today. First off is Greenwich Mean Time, which was created in 1847 at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, and that's located in London. Universal Coordinated Time was created to actually replace GMT. So it was created actually at the International Meridian Conference, and 26 nations showed up at that time. I think it was in the later 1800s. Colombia was there, the United States was there, so we're all hanging out deciding on how we want to write our times. Another type of time you want to know about is Unix time, which is the number of milliseconds or seconds that have passed since the Unix epoch. The Unix epoch is on January 1st, 1970, at midnight UTC. So if you ever see 1970 inside of some errors in your code, that is probably why. And then the last thing you'll need to know about is international standards, the International Standards Organization. So they decide how time should be formatted internationally. So speaking of London, I actually visited a few years ago, but what you can see here is the actual line for the Greenwich Mean Time. So you see below, there's like, really far down, but I'm sure nobody in the back can see it. But there's like a metal bar in the road that shows you where GMT starts, and then you can actually see there's like a laser line kind of along that GMT, and that actually shows you exactly where GMT occurs. So that's pretty cool. I would totally suggest visiting if you're into time. Okay, so now on to the JavaScript Date object. First off, you just need to know that it's very old. So I think JavaScript's kind of weird, and so you can see Doctor Who here saying, "Welcome to what I presume is your first alien planet, or your first programming language. Don't touch anything." So ECMA 262 is the standard that's created for JavaScript by ECMA International. And the first version of it was written in 1997. So the date object has actually existed since then, and all of the same methods on that date object have also existed for these past about 22 years. So only 6 new date object methods have been added since then. Not very many. Some weird things about JavaScript's date object. A lot of people ask, why the 0 indexed month? Because, you know, mostly months are 1 to 12, but in JavaScript it's 0 to 11. So the reason is that java.util.date actually also had a 0 indexed month. And eventually, and we know JavaScript is actually based on Java, kind of. And eventually, actually, Java got out of the old times. And in 2014, they released the java.time package. And so they now have a 1 indexed month. So JavaScript's kind of like lagging behind a little bit. And Moment.js actually still uses a zero-indexed month just to keep consistent with JavaScript as well. If you look on Stack Overflow, many people have this question: why the zero-indexed month? And you can see here Brendan Eich, the creator of JavaScript, responding on Twitter. So he says, in case it helps, basically Java's date object is a copy, or JavaScript's date object is a copy of java.util.date, which was created in 1995. And then he also says we were under, quote, make it look like Java management orders, and they only had 10 days to demo. So they had no time to invent their own API or even fix Java's. But Java's is now fixed, and JavaScript still isn't. So Brendan Eich says it's because of Java. And I joke, ooh, if I ever find out you're lying. The other weird thing about JavaScript's date object is you can actually do type coercion on it. So you can actually coerce a date object to a number of milliseconds from the Unix epoch simply by doing plus new date. So like, we know we can do like weird coercion things with JavaScript, but who knew that you could actually do it with the date object as well? Kind of scary. Okay, so on to JavaScript versus Moment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what exists in both the date object and also the library Moment.js. The first things I want to talk about are getters. So here you see a list of JavaScript's date object getters on the left, and then Moment.js getters on the right. And basically, you can get all types of things. You can get the date, the day, the year, hours, anything in time and date in general. What I like actually about Moment.js's API is that you can actually just do .date instead of actually having to say .getDate and things like that. And then here you can see that you can get similar things, almost all of the same date pieces and time pieces, but you can get them in UTC format, so along the lines of the UTC time zone. And then similarly with Moment.js, again, it has a simpler API in my opinion. You can actually grab a moment and then say .utc, use that method, and then call the same method to get whatever you need from it. So it's a little bit less to memorize, I think. Now we'll talk about setters. So similarly, with JavaScript's date object, you can do set date, set whatever piece of date or time that you need. And then with Moment.js, again, a simpler API where you can actually just say .date and then put an argument into that method in order to set the thing that you want. So it's a little bit simpler. And then again, with the UTC, you can again use .utc to set a UTC time or date or whatever piece of the time or date object that you're setting. Some other methods in JavaScript, so I like to say I've got gadgets and gizmos aplenty, and Doctor Who really loves her sonic screwdriver. Getting ready for Halloween over here. So some other methods that exist. So on JavaScript's date object, what you see here is you can do two date string. So you can actually like format a date into a string. In Moment, what you would use is the method .format and then feed in the string of the format that you would like to use. .isostring and toJSON actually return the same thing. So you would just use the exact same formatting inside of Moment. Unfortunately, with Moment, there are a few strange things. You can't get the exact same formatting. So you can see here, I'm actually concatenating +z, the +z string, at the end. So it's a little bit frustrating. So it's like some places where Moment.js might fall over compared to the date object. And then next what you'll see is .valueOf, which returns the number of milliseconds since the Unix epoch for the date that you're calling that on. And then with Moment, you can do the same thing by saying .format lowercase x, but that will actually return a string. So you'll actually need to parse that into an integer. Next, you see here .toString, .toTimeString, and .utc string. So basically what they'll return is the formats that show below it. So it's the day of the week, month, day, year, time, and then the time zone, but also the actual time zone name as a string. And interesting, there isn't like a great way to do any of these things in Moment.js, and I presume it's just because they actually have a separate library just for time zones. And then below that, you'll see two UTC string. And then on the moment side, again, you see a similar issue where I can format that string, but actually I need to concatenate GMT as a string to that. Next up, some other things that I think are super cool about both JavaScript Date Object and Moment.js. So locale strings exist. The way that you can call locale string is using toLocale string, toLocale date string, or toLocale time string. And then in Moment, you again use .format, but you feed in L or LTS. And I think they're super cool. Why do I think they're super cool? It's because basically what you can do is you can create a date here at the top, and then below that you can create a set of options which tells you how you want to format different pieces of a date. And then below that you can see I'm console logging, calling toLocale date string on any of these dates, and then I feed in a language that I want to choose, and then those options. So what you can see here is you can actually see German, Arabic, and Korean. And JavaScript will actually just automatically format these exactly as they're supposed to show up in those particular languages. So it internationalizes everything for you. It's kind of amazing, in my opinion. Some of the options that exist on the toLocale format are here. The ones that I personally find most interesting are, I know they're a little hard to read, but over here on the left side, you'll see NU, which is actually a numbering system. So you can use all types of numbering systems. So if I read, you can use Arab, Bali, Bang, Full Wide, Guru, Telu, Thai, Latin. There's all types of numbering systems that exist in the world, and all you have to do is feed it in this option, and you'll get that. Below that, you'll see CA, which actually sets the type of calendar that you would like to use. So there you can actually see the options: Buddhist, Chinese, Coptic, Ethiopian, Islamic, Hebrew, Gregory, Indian, Persian, Japanese. All types of calendars exist as options for this toLocale string. So it's pretty cool. But you actually get both of those things on JavaScript and on Moment. Some more options exist as well. And so this is totally how I feel about toLocale date string. I'm I would love one. I want to keep it in my collection. Some other interesting things about JavaScript's date object. So here you'll see .getYear and .setYear. Earlier, what I had actually talked about with getters and setters is that JavaScript has .getFullYear and .setFullYear. And the reason being, these two have been deprecated because they would actually return a 2-digit format. So that could be an issue, because if you return, for example, 19, are you talking about 1919, 2019? I don't know, but I like to joke that people didn't think we would live beyond the Mayan calendar. Another thing that's been deprecated is toGMT string. And the reason it's been deprecated is because it used Internet Greenwich Mean Time conventions. So the exact format of the return value would depend on the platform and the browser that you're using. So you could be getting all types of time from this toGMT string, and that's why it doesn't exist anymore. Lastly, we have toLocale format. And basically what this does is it converts a date to a string using a specified format. And it didn't use international.datetime format, which is what we use today, and is standards compliant. So this is super non-standard because it doesn't use standards. And it's been deprecated as of Firefox 58+. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit more about Moment. And you're probably wondering, entonces, ¿por qué Moment? Because everything I talked about, you can do in JavaScript. So maybe you're feeling a little bit I'm sorry, what? Well, some of the things that you can actually do in JavaScript, or in Moment that you can't do in JavaScript, is you have a set of getters that exist in Moment, such as getting the year's quarter. You can get a locale-aware day of the week. You can get the week of the year. And just so you know, there aren't always 52 weeks in a year. There might be more. You can get the day of the year, which ranges from 1 to 366 because of leap years. And then also you can get the weeks in the year. And then also you can get the Unix time in seconds. The other huge thing that Moment.js offers is that datetime math is super easy. You can use .add or .subtract, and then choose the pieces of the date or the time that you would like to add or subtract to the date you have. Another thing you can do is you have these easier methods to use .startOf and .endOf, which basically set specific parts of the date to the start of that or the end of that. For example, if you did start of and the hour, then it would set it to 0 automatically. Other things you can use are .local, which sets the time to the local time zone of your user. .utc, which sets the time to the equivalent UTC time zone. And then last, UTC offset, which returns the UTC offset in minutes. The other super cool thing that Moment.js deals with really well are time zones, which are everywhere. So Moment time zone exists, and this is a totally separate library that you use in conjunction with Moment.js. So you can create moments with time zones by using both of these libraries, and then you can easily manipulate and edit those time zones by using the time zone library. So here you see moment.tz, which creates a moment with a time zone attached to it. And then below that, you can actually see Moment's time zone object, which consists of a name, an abbreviation, untils, which is the timestamp in milliseconds from the Unix epoch, and then also offsets, which are the offsets from GMT or UTC in minutes. Okay, so you're probably also wondering, entonces, ¿cuál debemos usar? And I'm like, oh, no sé. So silly me, I must have gotten a little bit confused about these two things. And what I would say, another quote from me, is that you should just use JavaScript until you can't anymore. You'll be fine. And I also like to say, but don't specifically take my advice, and do whatever's best for your team and how you need to scale your product around date and time. And also that people prevail and hope prevails, and that's something that Doctor Who strongly believes in. So one of the things that we can hope for is temporal. Temporal is a TC39 proposal that's coming out. And TC39 is the technical committee that creates ECMAScript's standards. And I'm sure me and also Moment.js creators were like, I knew this would happen. So temporal actually creates all of these standards that kind of match a lot of the things that Moment.js created and does for us. So here you see a short GIF, and I'm just going to quickly scroll through the API here. There's one thing that I specifically stop on, which is addition and subtraction. So eventually the API for temporal and hopefully JavaScript's date object will include addition and subtraction and more easily the ability to more easily manipulate your times and your dates. And this is how I feel about it. I love it. Okay, más cosas. We have this article by Zell Liu. So he wrote it for CSS Tricks, and it's called Everything You Need to Know About Date in JavaScript. And it's super helpful for learning all about the date object specifically in JavaScript. There's also this super cool talk by Maggie Pint at Nebraska.js, and it's called Date and Time, Odds, Ends, and Oddities, where she talks about really weird things in date and time, not specifically associated with JavaScript. So after watching and reading some of these things, I felt super well informed, like Doctor Who here. And that's all I have for you. Muchas gracias. Preguntas?